Tonight, we're very fortunate to have Andrew Yang, who ran a spirited campaign, captivated many of our students here on campus, and Michael Zhu was the founder and really the campus coordinator of Harvard Students for Yang. He will be moderating, along with Mohammed Zadeh, who is our Director of Communications at the Institute of Politics, and she is actively engaged with so many of the issues at the IOP. So we've tapped two great student leaders. Sahar, I'll let you kick it off with my thanks for what you do at the Institute of Politics. And Michael, thank you for joining us as well. And Andrew, thank you for joining us here at the Institute. We invite you back from time to time as you care to think about these issues with us, as our students are keenly interested. And
thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Sahar, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, for that introduction. Andrew, it's such an honor to be speaking with you this evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk with us at the Institute of Politics. And thank you to everyone who took the time out of your evening to log on to the conversation. Without further ado, Michael and I have some questions for you, and we're looking forward to the conversation. Before even launching your presidential campaign, you served as the CEO of a very successful education company, Manhattan GMAT, which was later acquired by Kaplan. So to what extent do you see the transition of schools and institutions of higher education to remote learning as being an advantage for students across the country? And to what extent do you see remote learning as exaggerating already present socioeconomic disparities felt across America?
Well, thank you for the great question, Sahar. Thank you to both you and Michael for moderating. So much fun. Do you have like permanent moderating duties, or did you just get me? Was it like are you moderating on Thursday too? I'm pretty sure, Michael, it's just me. I don't know for you, and this is like a weekly responsibility.
No, we are just here for a conversation just for you. Looking forward to it too.
Oh, tremendous. Well, I have kids and their schools may or may not take place in person. I get the sense that most of the folks on this Zoom tonight are students at Harvard, either the college or Kennedy School, or maybe from some other schools. So for you all, are you remote as well? Is that correct?
We're all remote, classes entirely. At least Michael and I
for the semester.
So Michael, it's funny. You're just like me, where you're like in your room, be like, oh, I'm going to zoom on this thing. I'm going to put a jacket on. It's time to moderate. Yeah. It's time to look good. Well, the reason I ask this, Sahar, is because if you put yourself in the shoes of people that aren't that much younger than you, who are in school, who are then having to learn online, you know that it's not as good as going in person to some place. No, it's true for you, and I would say it's more true for younger children. Whereas if you're a younger child, a lot of the learning you get is socialization, and it's obviously very difficult to get that kind of socialization if you're remoting in. And even if you look at the development of hard skills like math, there have been studies that have shown a 30 to 70% drop off between retention from when you are in person versus online. So the frustration I have as a parent is that online is really not as good as the real thing. I mean, we could just call it as it is. And in our society today, we have a tendency to put a happy face on things as soon as we don't have a choice. So now it's like, well, we're online. Maybe online is awesome. And then we turn around being like, is online awesome? I'm here to tell you all that it's not your imagination. Online is not awesome. And it gets less and less awesome the younger you get. So for younger kids, it's worse and worse. And to your question about the fact that does this make inequities worse? It 100% does. Because if you're a young kid who's in a disadvantaged community or a household, you're going to fall further behind when your school does not open for that year. And if you're a young person who's, let's say, starting their career, which to me is still young, but like people a few years older than you, it's very difficult to get a foothold in an organization if you don't have a chance to prove yourself And a lot of proving yourself, unfortunately, comes down to whether or not you can just interact with folks in a way that gets them to trust in your work, to like you. So, Sahar, you interned at CNN, and you had it sounds like a really good internship where they gave you real responsibility, and I'm sure you could prove yourself. But that's not necessarily going to be the case for folks who are trying to get a foothold in different types of organizations. So this is just a really rough time, I think, and we shouldn't pretend that online is as good as in person in a lot of these environments. It's just the best we can do right now. So it behooves us to try and make the best of the best we can do right now, and that's what we have to try and pour our energies into, especially for younger kids.
Absolutely. Really appreciate that answer, especially the kind of just perspective within the times that we're living in. Sort of the next question is that before the announcement of your presidential run in 2017, universal basic income as a policy proposal only garnered about 25% approval rating in this country. But by the end of your presidential run, your campaign stated that over 2/3 of Americans approve of the implementation of UBI. I want to ask, with this newfound support for universal basic income from the American people that's growing every day, what do you see as the hurdles to overcome for the implementation of your flagship proposal within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, thanks for the question, Michael. There's a poll that came out just the other day that said that about 75% of Americans are for cash relief during the pandemic, and 55% are for universal basic income in perpetuity, including the vast majority of Democrats. So, like you just pointed out, it grew a ton during my campaign, and then it grew even more during the pandemic, unfortunately, because when all of the businesses shut, everyone looks around and says, well, I guess we should send people money so they can survive. And then when they did that in April, people quite liked it, and the economists looked and said, wow. So I saw a study that it was a study, but it was a news account from, I believe it was June. And they said universal basic, or the cash stimulus reduced poverty. That was essentially the headline. And people seemed like, wow, this is really newsworthy. Like giving people money reduces poverty. And so we had this real-time universal basic income implementation. And now to me, Michael, the question really is how you can get Congress to pass something that the majority of us are for. And that sounds straightforward, but unfortunately, people watching this know that it's not that straightforward, because there are a bunch of things now that the majority of us are for that Congress just cannot seem to get done. So an example would be addressing climate change. Majority of Americans are for that. Reasonable gun safety regulations, majority of Americans are for that. And so now you can put universal basic income into the same category. Majority of Americans are for it, so why doesn't it happen? And the answer is that our legislators now are no longer really responsive to what we want anymore. Now, why is that? There are a number of reasons. The main one is that their political futures are not dependent upon what the population at large thinks. Their political futures are dependent upon whether they will be primaried in their particular seat. And right now, they can generally only be primaried by someone within their own party because it's a safe seat. The majority of these seats are either clean blue or clean red. So all you have to worry about is someone more extreme than you. And so if you're on the right, that means someone very extreme on the right. And if you're on the left, it's the same. So there's unfortunately this real breakdown in incentives, and the breakdown gets much, much worse because of all the money in politics, where an incumbent starts out with like $1 million cash advantage and a 90% chance of winning again. And so their incentives are to try and stay in their seat and not rock the boat too much. Now, if this sounds grim, I think we all know it to be true at this point. I had a conversation with Ro Khanna, the member of Congress from California, just the other week, and he said that, yeah, this is the way it's going down in Congress, where getting solutions across the finish line does not correspond to how we do or how members of Congress do. So, Michael, I'm now dedicated towards trying to restore the feedback mechanism between us and our legislators so we can get universal basic income passed. And that's not just UBI, that's also addressing climate change and these other major proposals we know we need. But at this point now, we're all in despair that DC does not actually listen to us anymore. And one of the main reasons they don't listen to us is because the money does not come from us. The money comes from the layer of corporate interests and the lobbyists that fund the campaigns. So the big things we need to push for, in my opinion, number one is public financing of campaigns so that the people fund their candidacies. And what I'm proposing is $100 for every voter, that we can just give 100 democracy dollars to whoever we can vote for. And that would change the incentives dramatically. Try and get corporate money out of politics, but that's trickier. So that's one reason why I like the public funding better. Ranked choice voting so that we can actually vote along our genuine desires and interests, as opposed to thinking like can't waste a vote. And there are many people right now watching this right now who thank you, Michael, and thank you to everyone who's supported me. But you didn't have Joe as your number one candidate during the primaries, but now I believe you're going to get behind Joe and Kamala to a large extent. But imagine a world where you could vote for whomever you want and then just slot Joe and Kamala in second, and know that if your first choice didn't make it, then your vote gets counted, and there's no danger of you shooting yourself in the foot by voting third party, which right now, is the message. And then the most dramatic thing is I'm for term limits for members of Congress, because we need folks to be able to go to DC, do something, and leave, instead of thinking if they go there, they just stay there forever. The average age of a member of Congress right now is 62 years old. For senior leadership, it's older than that. And so it feels like your legislators are kind of out of touch. We live in a gerontocracy. And one of the reasons we live in a gerontocracy is because the goal right now is to go to DC and stay there for as long as possible. So it's a very long-winded way of saying passing universal basic income requires fixing the machinery of our democracy. And that is where I think our attention needs to turn, because the worst case scenario is we just argue over who's in the cockpit of the machine while the machine just continues to break down.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Andrew. And along with all the other policies that you speak and advocate for, one of your campaign's most memorable slogans was, not left, not right, but forward. And similarly, at the Institute of Politics, we strive to be a bipartisan organization that encourages students to not only learn from each other, but from a wide range of political perspectives. So with that in mind, are there any aspects of the Republican Party that you agree with? And where is the common ground, in your opinion, if any, between the two parties that seem right now to be mutually exclusive? And who is a member of an opposing party that you admire?
I just got a very nice article where Jeb Bush said some nice things about me, which kind of makes me like Jeb. There's like a human reciprocity impulse. It's like Jeb likes me, then I like Jeb too. I think the common ground we can find very quickly between Democrats and Republicans is that right now there's this argument of big government versus small government, and it's missing the point. It's really effective government or smart government. And that's what we should be able to agree on. Where if you look at, for example, the CDC's failures in helping contain the pandemic or the coronavirus, if you look at the actual failures, it wasn't a lack of resources. It was just bureaucracy that slowed things down and made everyone risk averse. Their first test was faulty, which we lost valuable weeks. So that wasn't a case where if they had an extra $1 billion or $2 billion, like they would have had a better test. I mean, they had plenty of resources and money. They had everything they needed. They just couldn't get it done because they weren't designed as an organization to be fast and responsive. They were designed to move, I think one of the commentators called it at the speed of science. And the speed of science works when you are dealing with long-term research, but it doesn't work so well when you have a real-time pandemic. So what we have to try and come to agreement on between both sides is, look, it's not about the dollars and cents, it's about the efficacy. It's about whether or not the organizations or institutions can actually solve the problems that they're supposed to solve for. Another example, and I'm trying to think of how old you all were when this happens because time flies, but the rollout of healthcare.gov in 2013, where you have this massive overhaul of the healthcare system. You spend $684 million telling us about it. And then when it rolls out, it doesn't work so well. And everyone's looking around being like, well, how can I have trust in this thing? Like, it could only get, I think literally the number was something like 20. It only could sign up 20 people on that first day because tens or hundreds of thousands of people showed up. So if you're a Democrat, which I am, and you're arguing for government to take on a bigger role, which I think it has to, given the scope of the challenges we're dealing with. You have to be realistic and disciplined and say, look, it's not just about throwing resources and saying, like, we're doing more. It's about actually holding yourself accountable to whether you can deliver something in the way that you're saying to the American people you can deliver it. So if you say you're going to have a website for millions of people to sign up for healthcare, the website should work, like when you say it's going to work, and if you're dedicating billions of dollars to the Center for Disease Control, then it should not fail you in the time of need that it was essentially founded to help address. So these are things where, like, the real lack of accountability in government, I think, is frustrating people on both sides, and it makes it harder for us to solve real problems. And I feel like this is something that crosses party lines, that Democrats and Republicans alike should be arguing for smarter, more efficient, more modern day government solutions.
No, thank you. I mean, that answer definitely really, addresses sort of just exactly the moment that we're in, and especially sort of the technological changes that we see happening just every year. This leads right into my next question, which is on the campaign trail in a very crowded field of candidates. Many people saw you as the tech candidate, given your background in tech entrepreneurship and for all your innovative ideas about artificial intelligence, automation, cybersecurity, and even your engaging presence on social media. My question is, what do you see as the most significant governmental technological challenges that this nation faces today? What measures should the U.S. government take to ensure that we meet these challenges? And how do we retain our position as a world leader in technological innovation and advancement?
Yes, Andrew Yang, the tech candidate. I have to say, I feel very self-conscious anytime I show up to something and then like a setting is wrong. People are like, can't you figure this out? Aren't you the tech candidate? So I'd say there are two major responses I'd have to that question, Michael. What's the most pressing technological issue? I would say the most pressing technological issue for us right now is the fact that Americans can't agree on basic facts anymore because we're getting different sets of facts through information silos. Like that, if you're the average American of your age, you are not watching cable news for your news. You're getting the news from your social media, and your social media feed is very much determined by what you clicked on in the past and who's in your network. So to use something that should be very, very obvious, for example, wearing a mask is a very positive thing to do. There could be someone in Arkansas getting a completely different set of information than you are. And then when you come together, you're like, how are you voting the way you're voting or thinking about things the way you're thinking? And then they think the same thing in reverse, because we're seeing almost different versions of reality. And unfortunately, the social media companies do better the more they put us in these information silos and reinforce what we're already thinking. So this may or may not be what you think of as a technology issue, though, in my opinion, it really is, because you're talking about Facebook that's making tens of billions of dollars off of us every year. And it makes more the more, frankly, angry and depressed we get, and the more we turn on each other. That's good for business. Like, you have a business model where it's actually better if we don't agree. So this is going to continue to tear us apart, get us angry and depressed. There are massive mental health implications for teenage girls in particular. Studies have shown that teenage girls have seen massive surges in anxiety and depression. And the mental health crisis is across every demographic, particularly young people, but teenage girls have shown more of a negative impact than other groups. And to me, as a parent, like, if you're literally making your kids sad and anxious, then what is the point? Like, Lawrence Lessig, who's at Harvard, put it like this. He said, democracy is poor so Facebook can be rich. And is that a trade-off we're all happy with? It's like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, at least Zuck's really rich. What? He only bought part of that island. He should have the whole island. So that legitimately is the balance we're in right now. And we need to try and get our arms around what social media is doing to us, our mental health, and our democracy. Particularly the selling and reselling of our data. So that's immediate technology issue number one. The other issue I'm going to identify, because I think it's so crucial, is artificial intelligence. The fact is, it's going to transform many, many industries and jobs. And there is something of a de facto arms race between the U.S. and China right now in terms of deploying various AI algorithms throughout different environments. And the speed that AI develops at is changing exponentially, where they just came out with this AI that can write as well as or better than most human journalists. So think about what that could do. You have also AI that can make deepfake videos that are indistinguishable from reality. You think it's Andrew Yang talking to Michael and Sahara right now. Maybe it's not. Like maybe, who the heck knows? And so these are applications of AI that could push us into this real-time dystopia, where imagine if you could not distinguish fact from fiction because I could send you a video of someone doing something and you legitimately have no idea whether to trust it or not.
Thank you so much for bringing up those concerns and pivoting into more of a international scope. The last several months have placed incredible strain on global governance and international relations as the U.S. currently reevaluates the nature of its political, economic, diplomatic ties with several nations around the world. And one such nation is China, which has become the focus of a variety of controversies regarding its political interventions in Hong Kong and human rights abuses. From your perspective, what should the U.S. aim to achieve with the future U.S. China foreign policy decisions? And what actions should the U.S. take going forward to address China's human rights violations in Hong Kong?
I have family in Hong Kong. I feel some of this stuff very personally, like I'm sure many of you do. And I'm old enough to remember a time when the U.S. could actually influence Chinese decisions and policies because China really wanted to get into the WTO, or China really wanted to be able to host the Olympics, or whatever it was, that there was like a Chinese interest, that there was a real give and take or exchange between the U.S. and China that potentially changed Chinese policies in certain directions. The worst case scenario in my mind is a world of Cold War, open tension, limited communication, and potential sources of conflict that just go up and up over time. So the ties between the countries, in my mind, have historically kept us from some of the worst tensions or conflicts that we've seen in periods of the past. And you're never going to be able to get your arms around climate change, AI, future pandemics, North Korea, if the US and China don't have at least some means of collaboration and communication. So that, to me, should be the US goal, is to stake out vital American interests and stake out human rights concerns and abuses that we should consider core to our own interests, and then say to China, look, here are the things that you want. Like, for example, you might want access to international markets. Like, one of my goals is to create a world data organization where you have standards for how people handle each other's information and deploy AI. And so we could do something that's analogous to what happened with the WTO before, because one of China's great interests right now is getting access to foreign markets for their technology exports. And so if you could bring to bear a global framework that actually can make China think about some of the abuses in the context of their other goals, then you can make real progress on their treatment of the Uyghurs, on the treatment of Hong Kong, and other abuses that, in my mind, we should have front and center in our considerations as a country ourselves.
Definitely. Thank you for that answer, especially the way that, you're talking about how we're supposed to change and shift the conversation of politics. And that's sort of just kind of briefly where I want to go with the next question, which is running for president of the United States is a massive undertaking for anyone. Throughout your presidential campaign, you've reached millions of Americans like myself who've admired the ways you've shifted the conversation of politics towards issues that impact our everyday lives. Andrew, can you share some of your most memorable experiences from the campaign trail? And what has the campaign trail taught you about politics in our changing times?
Thanks, Michael. My most memorable experience was seeing you in New Hampshire. Now, it was up there, though, man. I remember we had good times. it genuinely was going to an event and having dozens of people and then hundreds and then thousands who were investing their hopes and aspirations for the future in me. And this is going to sound ridiculous given that I ran for president, is you really don't expect that. Like I was running for president, showing up to places, and frankly, no one was showing up for quite some time. So you kind of get used to that. And then when that changes, it was shocking every time. I remember there was a rally I went to when my team and I were complaining about the traffic. We were like, why is there so much traffic going to this rally? And then someone saw in one of the cars like an Andrew Yang sign and was like, this traffic is for us. And it was like the biggest like mind blower, like, oh, I'm waiting in my own traffic. So that's the most memorable thing, because you really don't expect it. You don't expect folks to invest in you in that way, and it makes you just want to fight harder and do more. And I still feel that to this day. We've distributed $8 million to struggling American families through this pandemic directly in the form of micro grants. And we're using Cash App and Venmo. We're not screwing around where you have to do, you don't need a tax return even, just gotta let us know how we can help. But that $8 million, one, makes me profoundly grateful to everyone who supported me, because that money's just coming in from donors. We're turning around to give it to struggling families. But also it makes me want to do so much more, because we're just scratching the surface of the need. Like for every $1,000 we distribute, we could be giving, an additional 5 or 10,000 if we had the money, because the needs are so prevalent throughout the country. So that's what you don't really realize, Michael, going into it, is that you become something bigger than yourself over time. And I saw myself as like a pretty normal guy running, honestly, so it was very moving in a way that I could not have predicted.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for indulging our questions. And at this time, I think we'd like to open up the forum to questions from the audience and everyone that's listening. So I believe that one of our first questions is going to be coming from Alex White, who is a first year at the college.
My gosh, Alex, you just showed up to Harvard. Does that first year mean like first week? like second week? Did you just show up?
Actually, so would have been rising sophomore a couple weeks ago. I'm actually going to be a sophomore this year. I'm online zooming in from Virginia, from the Shenandoah Valley, so up in the mountains, kind of rural areas. And I'm actually concentrating in government on the new public policy track. First of all, I want to thank you for some opportunities. I was able to field organize for your campaign where I'm from. And I actually had the privilege of going up to New Hampshire with Mike for that trip to knock doors.
Yes. I knew you looked familiar, Alex.
Appreciate it. Well, so what kind of drew me to your campaign was the fact that you really talked about, rural areas, flyover country, and some of those predominantly white working class voters that you just don't hear quite as much of from other candidates. And my question to you is, since in the last 10, 20, 30 years, those white working class voters have sort of staged an exodus from the modern Democratic Party, do you foresee them returning in the near future? And if so, what kind of strategy do the Democrats have to pursue to make sure that happens?
Well, thank you for the help on the campaign, Alex. Really appreciate it. And I agree that for whatever reason, Democrats have not been excellent at communicating to working class Americans around the country that the Democratic Party is for you. So yesterday was Labor Day. You all celebrated by not having class. And one of the things I learned when I was running for president was that Labor Day was inaugurated as a federal holiday because of mass riots that killed dozens of Americans and caused hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage. Like, that's the heritage of labor. And the Democratic Party traditionally was hand in hand with labor unions fighting for various worker rights. But today, that economic message has gotten lost somewhere in the Democratic Party, where when I was out on the trail and I talked to a truck driver and said I was a Democrat, like a lot of the time they would look at me like I just said a curse word, honestly. And then you think like, well, why does this trucker have such negativity around the Democratic Party, it's because for whatever reason, the truck driver does not think the Democratic Party cares about him. Same with like a waitress in rural Ohio or retail clerks. Like there are a lot of folks that feel like the Democratic Party is more talking at them than listening to them. There's like a sense of condescension in some of the messaging. And if we can fix that, then we can be off to the races, because one of the reasons why I ran was I care deeply about what happens to that truck driver or waitress or retail clerk, many of whom are going to lose their jobs, especially now with the pandemic. And if we put jobs and economic well-being and healthcare front and center, I think the Democratic Party can make massive inroads with those voters. And if we talk about, frankly, a lot of other things, like a lot of other things, then we're going to seem to them like we're out of touch, because for most of them, their kitchen table issues are really the main issues they want someone to help address. It's one reason why my campaign resonated with that group of people, Alex, where 42% of my supporters weren't sure they were going to support the Democratic nominee. So it just, and if you look at my policies, I think my policies are pretty straight up and down, like, fairly progressive. But just they sensed that I was talking to them and I cared about them and I was listening to them. And I struck them as a real person and not someone who was part of this DC machinery or a political class. And this is something I feel very strongly about, because if you look at the levels of confidence in government, if you go, or I'll use trusted media. So let's say Sahar works at CNN, a year from now or 2 years from now, which she might very well. They'll be smart to hire you. So about 60% of self-identified Democrats trust the media. And then if you look at independents, it goes down to 4%. And then you look at Republicans, it goes down to 20%. And there are similar trend lines around government. If you say, hey, do you think government's looking out for you? Democrats will be like 60, independents 40, Republicans 20. So we have this real asymmetry. And if Democrats just talk to each other, then it's just going to keep pushing away independents and Republicans in terms of their vision of how government interacts with the citizens of this country. So hopefully we can change that. And I hope to be part of changing that for folks on the left, because I don't think we can lose these people and bring the country back together at the same time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, Andrew. So our next question is coming from Sarah Lynn, who studies at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Do you like how I got some math into that last answer? Sorry. There's always math somewhere.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's such an honor to have you here and to hear and learn from you. My name is Sarah Lynn. I'm studying, I'm in the Master's in Public Policy program at HKS and concentrating in social and urban policy. And I'm calling in from central New Jersey tonight. So as you're one of the most prominent Asian Americans in national politics right now, I'm curious, to what extent do you feel pressured both publicly and or privately post-candidacy to be this essentialized voice or spokesperson for the Asian American community or electorate? Excuse me. I'm curious to hear how you've navigated this tension and how you've made sense of using your bully pulpit and your platform versus kind of resisting the boxes in which you've been placed.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's a very thoughtful question. I'm really proud to be the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. And right now, I think it's my job to try and activate Asian Americans around the country to get out and vote. So if you are my generation, you think of Asian Americans as kind of split politically. Some of you may still have friends and family members who in one way or another. So I was actually surprised myself to find that in terms of actual voting, Asian Americans are 75% Democrat, 25% Republicans now. Like in my earlier experience, it was more like 50-50 or 55-45 Dem. So the fact is we're very left-leaning now, and I think Trump has kind of pushed a lot of folks who are on the fence towards the opposite direction because he's so racially antagonistic, with his Kung Flu and China virus stuff that we all know is meant to gin up hostility towards different types of people. So the more Asian Americans vote, in my mind, the better. And traditionally, Asian Americans have voted at lower levels than other groups in this country. And having grown up Asian myself, I say pretty bluntly to folks that my parents did not talk about American politics in our house. I don't remember them voting I think they voted, but I don't remember them having that conversation. And they certainly were not pushing me and my brother to run for office. That was not the message. It was do well in school, get good grades, get a good job, and start trying to provide for yourself and your hypothetical family economically. I didn't have a family at the time, obviously. I was growing up, but but there was always this notion. It's like, well, you're going to have a family, so you should think about providing for them economically. And I think many Asian Americans who are first generation or second generation in this country grew up similarly, where politics was not the arena that we thought we were supposed to participate in. And that plays out in the fact that Asian Americans vote at lower levels, donate money to political campaigns at lower levels, and run for office at lower levels. And so now, Sarah, I think that I can help change that. I think I can try and get our levels of political activation and engagement up. And I am thrilled to do it. I'm thrilled to hopefully be something of like a galvanizer for Asian American communities around the country. And I happen to think that will help Joe and Kamala win, because it turns out the more of us vote, the more likely Joe and Kamala are to win. So there's no ambivalence in me about that role. I'm thrilled to play it. And I feel like I can play it in part because I kind of know where a lot of us are coming from. Because a lot of us didn't think about politics as the field that we were going to devote our careers to. And if I can change that, I'm thrilled for that too, because this country needs us more than ever. The country needs all of, everyone watching this. It needs young people, it needs smarts, it needs energy, it needs idealism, because it's not doing well. This country is trending in a terrible direction and has been for quite some time. I want to help fix that. I think when watching this can help fix that. I think Asian Americans can play a huge role in fixing that.
Wonderful. And up next, we have AJ Aurora, who's a student from MIT.
You let an MIT person in here? I'm kidding.
Hi, Andrew. It's such an honor to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule to speak with us. So my name is Ajay. I'm a sophomore at MIT studying economics and computer science. So my question is, I know that previously, you framed UBI as the solution to automation, but now with the pandemic, remote work has become much more popular and it just looks like it's here to stay. So how do you think that the role of automation in the work society will change in the next 6 to 12 months in the current pandemic and the following recovery? Do you think that there'll be a shift from automation necessarily destroying jobs to creating jobs? And just, do you think that the way we frame UBI will move just away from a solution to automation to more so a general solution to poverty?
Thanks, Ajay. I think that the conversation around universal basic income is changing, in part because millions of Americans have lost their jobs through no fault of their own, as physical proximity has become a net negative. So just to set the stage a little bit, let's say you went to Harvard or MIT, or you're going there now. So you were the smart kids in your high school. And if you think about the high school you went to, you probably went to a fine high school, or most of them went to college. So it's probably somewhat surprising to you that 35% of Americans will graduate from college and 65% will not. And that is more or less the norm. So then you look at the jobs of the average American. The main job sectors are retail, sales, truck driving and transportation, manufacturing, administrative and clerical. And a lot of these jobs do not actually get projected digitally very well. If you think about a lot of the jobs that require physical proximity, personal trainer, security guard, hairstylist, yoga teacher, and on and on. Those jobs aren't actually going to become Zoom friendly, most of them are just going to disappear. You know, it's like you can't give me a haircut over Zoom. You know, like if you tried, I mean, it'd just be you telling me what to do and me making a mess of it. So, so the conversation on universal basic income will shift because of need and exigency, where we're going to look around and see there are millions of Americans who just do not have a path forward, and we need to do anything under the sun to try and keep them from disintegrating into ruin, really. And you're seeing it happen in real time around us. You know, some of the early indicators are levels of eviction, health problems, but it's going to get worse and worse until we start reckoning with what's happening to these families. And everyone knows it's not their fault because, you know, it's like not your fault. Like I'm not going to a hairstylist or a nail salon or gym. I mean, it has nothing to do with you. So the automation trend, unfortunately, just got accelerated, where right now about half of companies have said, I'm going to invest more in automation, including companies like meatpacking processors, where if you have a bunch of meatpacking workers in a plant, you're getting yelled at for having so many humans in close proximity to each other. So you're like, all right, we're going to get like a meat processing robot in here, and then everyone will be happier. But then that means less of a need for workers at that plant and on throughout the supply chain. So I agree with you. The conversation's changing because it's become so much more immediate and present. And the automation trend that I campaigned on essentially got compressed into a much shorter time frame, 10 weeks instead of 10 years.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew. So our next question is coming from Will Huang, who is a student at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Hi, Andrew, thank you so much for doing this. I've been a really big fan of you. I've been following you for a while. I just want to start with a fun question. I know you're a big basketball fan. Who do you think is going to win the NBA Finals this year?
I had Clippers over Bucks originally, and now the Bucks pick's not looking so good. so I'm going to say, just because most of you are in Boston, I'm just going to say Clippers over Celtics. So I don't know if that makes you sad. I still have your team losing to the Clippers, but I think Clippers are going to win.
Okay, great. And then my serious question, how can universal basic income, which is portrayed as a race-neutral program, be designed in such a manner that it reduces the racial wealth gap that's derived from institutional racism and white supremacy between white and Black Americans?
Thank you, Will. The great thing about universal basic income is that it helps people with the least more. So let's say I give you $2,000 a month, and you're making $200,000. So that's like a 12% increase. You'll like it, but it's not going to change your lifestyle that dramatically to go from 200 to 224. But let's say you're making 24 and I give you an extra 24, then that will be like a 100% increase. And that would be a game changer for you. So the tough truth is that right now the net worth of a Black household is 10% that of a white household. Income levels aren't quite that disparate, but they're not very close to each other either. And so the impact of giving even a uniform amount of money will help communities of color dramatically more. It will help women more. It will help women of color more. And that's with something that seems on the face of it like egalitarian. Now, one of the misconceptions around me and my campaign was that I want to stop there. I don't. I think that universal basic income floor is like a foundation, and then we need to keep building on top of it. And so if there are things that we can do expressly for communities of color to help give them a real shot at a decent education, to help address the intergenerational legacies of housing discrimination and access to capital, I'm all for it. But one of the great things about even putting an equivalent amount of money into people's hands is that it actually becomes a giant stabilizer and equalizer right off the bat. So one thing I'm on the record for is that after we pass universal basic income or a version thereof, I think we should explore what reparations look like, because we have this massive, frankly, trillion or multi-trillion dollar debt to slaves and descendants of slaves, on which this country was built, essentially. So I would not stop at the Universal Basic Income Foundation, but I will say the Universal Basic Income has this incredible effect where it helps those with the least the most.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Will. And I'm so glad that I inspired you, Will. That makes me really happy.
Wonderful. And our next question is from Juna.
Hi, Andrew. My name is Yuna. I'm 25, and I graduated in 2017 from Harvard, and I'm Zooming from Boston. And first, I want to say I love your podcast. And also, I think you have the most infectious laugh of anybody in politics, which I think is like the greatest asset you can have in politics. So I just want to say those two things first.
Thank you, Yuna.
So my question is, I think growing up, there was a lot of institutions that I just took inherently as uncorruptible and not able to be politicized. And over the past 4 years, I've seen them all one by one kind of get degraded. So the CDC, just the integrity of the elections process, the Postal Service, the FDA, all of these things have just kind of been degraded slowly through the Trump administration. And my question is basically, do you think that's something that can be reversed? Or is it once that trust has been broken, can it not ever be fixed again?
It's a profound question, Yuna. And unfortunately, you're not alone. Where if you look at our trust in various institutions, they were eroding pre-Trump. I'm going to throw out a few. Hospitals, the media, schools, churches. If you think about a lot of these institutions, our faith in them has been slipping over time. And the most trusted institution in American life right now is the U.S. military. You can take that for what it's worth. Now, the issues you're describing, are around in many ways the pillars of what we used to think of as science. Like if you have the CDC, the FDA, you think they're applying objective, uniform standards and they're making decisions based upon scientific expertise and judgment. And what you've seen in very disappointing fashion is that the Trump administration or this era has put everyone into you're either with us or against us. And if you make some statement that we don't like, then your job's going to be on the line. So then you have members of the CDC seeming to waffle in various statements and proclamations. I thought one thing you were going to put in there was the Supreme Court, where I grew up thinking the Supreme Court was this objective body that was going to evaluate things based on legal standards. And then that seems like it's gotten very politicized, really, really awfully through the appointment system and the rest of it. So we're on essentially a one-way street to mistrust right now. And your question is the right question, which is, can you actually come back from that? Can you restore trust in various institutions in American life? And the answer is yes, but it's painstaking and time-consuming and expensive. It's a little bit like, so you're all college age or a little bit older in your case, Yuna. So you remember that friend you had in college and then for whatever reason you had a falling out? Yes. It's almost harder to become friends with that person again than it would be if you just showed you a new person. Like you'd be like, oh, new person, I'm cool with you. But it's like that person, when they let me down, like, I'm not going to get over it. That's essentially the way we're wired as human beings. So if you want to get me to trust again in institutions that have failed me, you have to really, really work at it, come in a big way and say, look, we get it. We have been a disappointment to you, and we're now going to do better. And we're going to prove it to you. And so to me, the government should be in prove it mode. And unfortunately, right now, we're in disprove it mode where we can't even pass a stimulus bill, even though like 90% of Americans agree it's the right thing to do. And like, we're like, what are you talking about? Like the last bill was in April, it's September. It's been 5 months. You guys can't pass a bill. So it's one reason why I'm so passionate about universal basic income, because I guarantee you, having campaigned around this country, most Americans do not think something like universal basic income is conceivable or possible because they spend all of their time organizing their life trying to save $50 or $80. And when I came around saying, I want to give everyone $1,000 a month, they were really like, this is impossible. They're like, this can never happen. This was just like, it's just too beyond the scope of our experience. So when we pass it, and I do say when we pass it and that family gets that slug of money, like it will actually restore their trust in a more dramatic way than anything else we can do. I can get on TV and talk until I'm blue in the face about what I'm going to do for you. And at this point, no one will listen because they don't believe. Like they're just like, whatever, you're just a talking head on TV, you're full of it. But the moment that money shows up in their bank account, all of a sudden everything turns around and becomes real. They look around and be like, oh my gosh, this happened. Like I can do whatever I want with this money. And then when they find that that's not just a one-time event that happens all the time, like that's how we get this weight off our backs and start to rebuild the trust, But and that's the beginning. It's a very big launching point. But then we actually have to start holding folks to real standards where if you are, to me, it's unconscionable that like people in the CDC haven't like apologized to us. Like, they should just come and say, look, we botched this in a massive way. We're sorry. But you never get that from them. You just get these very corporate speak releases saying we at the CDC are working very hard. It's like, I don't want to hear you're working hard. I want someone to take responsibility. And in American life, like we haven't seen anyone take responsibility for years. When the economy crashed in 2008, like anyone take responsibility for that? No. Like freaking guys were getting paid tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. We're literally like, who could have known? Like one person from Citibank said something like, well, when the music's playing, you got to keep dancing. It's like, that's the way you make these decisions. You people are terrible. Like, and they felt like they were owed riches. And the crazy thing is they actually got their riches here in America because like in America, no one got held accountable. Purdue Pharma killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, met survivors of opiate overdoses every day on the trail. No one went to jail. So everyone's looking around wondering why we don't trust anymore. It's because we haven't seen anyone actually stand up and say it was my fault and I will actually face real consequences.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew. So we have our last student question. This is Nicholas Sung, studying at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Hello, sir. My name is Nick Sung. I'm a public policy student at the Kennedy School. I'm also the co-chair of the Asian American and Pacific Islander caucus here at the Kennedy School. I'm zooming in from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Big fan.
Long way.
Yeah, I know, right? Long way. I'm a big fan. I feel like you've been getting a couple softballs, so I wanted to press you actually a little bit about something that I'm surprised Ezra Klein didn't ask you on his recent interview with you. And it's about your recent op-ed, or I guess not so recent. It was in April for the Washington Post. And in it, and I'll quote here, you encourage AAPIs to show without a shadow of a doubt that we are Americans. And again, you mentioned this in the interview with Ezra Klein, but I think that many in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community would find your statement offensive. It feeds into this myth of Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners. I'm wondering, and again, I'll quote, do you still believe that Asian Americans need to embrace and show our Americanness in ways we have never before? Or have you changed your beliefs since then? Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. So I was born in upstate New York. I grew up in this country. I was one of the only Asian kids in my town. And the fact that we are American to me is like obvious and incontrovertible. And there are various things that I suggest in the op-ed that I would love us to do at a higher level. The obvious one is vote. But I also said things like donate, volunteer, just like help people, do something. Because there is this notion that I certainly grew up with that, and I described, that politics was not for us, that, there was this tacit message that voting, I'm not sure my parents ever actually told me and my brother that like voting was important. And so I was saying, look, being an American includes lots of things, and we should just embrace more of what those things are in terms of public life. And I'd certainly stand by that. I would never suggest that we're anything other than American, because to me, it's plain as day that we are just as American as anyone else.
Thank you, sir.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And our last question from the audience is actually going to be from Alice Stewart, who is a returning resident fellow and CNN correspondent. I had the honor of being on her liaison team last year and excited to welcome her back as part of the Fellows and Study Groups program, where she, along with 5 other resident fellows, will host off-the-record study groups. So if you're looking for more ways to engage with the IOP after this discussion, her study group is going to be chatting with top people in both the Biden and Trump campaign and open to all Harvard students. So welcome, Alice.
Thank you, Sahar. Great to be here. And Andrew, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm a fellow CNN colleague with you. And let me just say, if you can look at Michael's face, there are a lot of students on campus that have his face. you had a huge number of supporters at Harvard. And when I was there last fall, they loved following you and keeping up with you. And I just think it's great that you really energize a lot of the students there on campus. And my first study group will have some folks from the circus on. I know you were on that show, and you just have a great way of connecting with people. But my question was, now that you're sort of on the TV side of things, how can you explain something along the lines of when you actually got out there in Iowa and New Hampshire, and I've been comms director on 4 presidential campaigns. I've been to all these places. What was it like when you were trying to say actually to media, whether it's print, TV, Fox, CNN, local, national, you're saying, no, this is really what people are talking about. This is really what people are concerned with. Was there ever kind of you felt like there was a huge disconnect with what people are seeing on television or reading in the paper with what you're hearing from people on the ground? And how do you feel that kind of helped you to get your message out when you're able to really connect with people face to face?
Hey, Alice, how are you?
Great.
Now, I think campaigning around the country was an experience that I certainly couldn't compare to anything else. And you do get a different sense of what people care about. I'll give you an example, Alice. When Trump was getting impeached, I still never got a single impeachment question while I was on the trail. Like you'd speak to dozens of people and no one was like, what do you think about this impeachment stuff? Whereas if you turned on cable news, including our employer, it was just going to be all about impeachment, which on one level I completely understand because, it's national news, obviously. But on another level, I think that was like a symptom of how we would get caught up in a particular conversation. And unfortunately, a lot of Americans around the country just think it's not a conversation that's directly relevant to them. And so I think we have to work harder and dig deeper to figure out how we have conversations that are more relevant to people. And I think I connected with people because they sensed in me someone who was genuinely exploring and cared and wanted to improve their way of life. And they didn't get that sense from a lot of other candidates, which to me is something we should examine. Like, why is it that that the confidence in politicians is so low? And now I am a member of the media. I'm like this strange hybrid too. And I still feel myself to be that mavericky outsider that was begging for cable news time not that long ago. And to those of you who are watching too, I hope you see in me like a version of yourself, because I was just that first generation Asian kid who was told to do well in school. And I, did my best and ended up having a career that led me in certain directions. And at some point I stood up and said, you know what, I don't think this is going well. And I think I can help. I think I can contribute. And when I started my run, I did not have any illusions where I thought, well, I'm going to believe in what I'm doing and I'm going to feel like I can at least try to move my country in a positive direction. And I can live with that. Like if it's frankly humiliating, like I can live with that. If it's just like 2 years of my showing up to empty rooms, like I can live with that. Like whatever it is, like, I'm game for it. And the fact that so many people got behind me still surprises me to this day, but it also inspires me to want to do better. And now that I'm kind of a member of like a group of people that actually has some kind of public platform, I want to use that positively. Alice, I want to shape our conversation so that they are connected to the day-to-day lives of so many Americans. Even right now, where we're on Zoom, I think about all the Americans who lost their jobs who aren't anywhere near a laptop. You know what I mean? Like how are we hearing about that waitress whose diner has not reopened, that tutoring service that's closed for good, that dog walking business that's disappeared forever? Like there are all of these stories that right now aren't part of our discourse because of just the features of this time. And that's what we have to keep on pushing ourselves on, is, who are the folks that are nowhere near, frankly, like a Harvard Zoom call. So this is the challenge that I'd like us to try and fulfill as people who actually can make a difference, because there aren't that many of us. That's the other thing you realize. Like Alice, you and me now are part of like a very select group of people that can actually occasionally get in front of hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans.
Thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Alice. Appreciate the heck out of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that, I think, brings us to a close for this evening's forum. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been such a pleasure and an honor. And thank you to everyone who took the time out of their evenings to ask such compelling questions and join the conversation. And with that, I'll hand it back to our Executive Director, Mark Guerin.
Thank you, Sahar, and thank you, Michael, for your very thoughtful moderation of tonight's conversation. Thanks to all the questioners, which was really thought-provoking questions. And finally, Andrew, thanks to you on behalf of the Institute of Politics. Our mission here since 1966 is the living memorial to President Kennedy and to inspire Harvard students to a life of public purpose in politics and public service. And I have no doubt both your presidential campaign and this conversation tonight really allowed our students and graduates and those other students who joined us and our guests the opportunity to reflect on how they can lead that life of consequence, lead a life committed to public purpose. So with our thanks for your commitment to public service and to the public good, we thank you for joining us tonight. And thanks to our great moderators, to Sahar and Michael, and to all of our listeners here tonight. Join us on Thursday when Alice and the other 5 fellows, as Sahar said, will be here in the forum at 6 o'clock. And with that, good night and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Appreciate the heck out of you. And you can do much, much more. There's so much potential here on the Zoom call. If Andrew Yang can do it, anyone can do it. Let's put it that way. So get on out there, and hopefully we can leave this country and world in a shape that we can be proud of for your generation. Thank you all so much. Put the money in our hands. 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 Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.